Today I'm speaking with Michela Giordano Castro. Michela, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're having me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to meet you. And before we jump into your story, I'm just going to give a quick bio. Michela lives in Houston, Texas. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She's also a trauma-informed therapist and a spiritual coach who empowers women to heal from religious trauma and to rebuild a meaningful spirituality beyond the confines of traditional doctrines. She was raised in a conservative, fundamentalist Christian home and was homeschooled. And Michela was deeply devoted to her faith. She was aspiring even to become a missionary and a preacher's wife. But at age 18, her faith unraveled, sparking a decade-long journey of questioning, grief, and transformation. Michela's expertise in trauma and internal family systems therapy is deeply informed by her personal transformation and life journey. Her therapeutic approach integrates evidence-based practices like cognitive behavioral therapy and feel-to-heal methods with insights from her own path of healing. She's the creator of Unbound Faith, which is a group coaching program designed to help women reconnect with their true selves, to navigate family dynamics, and to replace fear with love in their spiritual lives. Through her platform, which has got a cool name, it's called Michela's Mind Munchies. Michela explores topics ranging from mental and emotional well-being to personal growth, and she blends her professional knowledge with some thought-provoking reflections. She is a YouTuber as well, and you can follow her. I'll have the link beneath this video for that. She's also on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at Michela's Mind Munchies, and just so many good things. I was exploring your YouTube channel and your Instagram page this morning. Great stuff there, really good ideas. But before we jump into all that, could you please just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, some of the things I love to do involve cooking, but usually not following a recipe. I love it. Yet, if you see me, you probably think I'm hating it because I'm frantically running around, making stuff up, making sure things don't burn. But that's just kind of my style with cooking. I enjoy that. I enjoy being out in nature. I have a trail near my home, which I love to walk as often as I can. So yeah, those are other tidbits.
That's awesome. Do you all have any specific like family favorite recipes that you come back to either in the holidays or every now and again?
My dad is Sicilian, and so we have the
Nice.
culture of all the Italian food. He's like off the boat, Sicilian. So definitely around this season, making like meatball soup, lasagnas, lots of delicious, delicious Italian food.
Nice. It's been interesting. My kids love to cook too, but when they say we want to cook, they just mean we want to mix some stuff together and see what comes out. Like, Daddy, we want to make a cake. Can I please have 16 eggs? I'm like, oh my God. Anyway, it's interesting how it works. Well, we're so glad you're here. We love to hear people's journeys. I do want to remind people, especially my active listeners, that everybody's journey is different. We're going to talk about some aspects of where your journey is taking you that is a little different than mine, a little different than everybody else's. But it's important for us to, I think, reflect on the fact that just because people become atheists or agnostics doesn't mean spirituality has to end. And also to, most importantly, perhaps reflect on the fact that we do have to give each other the wide open autonomy and preference to say, look, your journey is your journey, mine is mine, and we're going to land differently, and we have to respect and appreciate as well as learn from each other. And we've talked before on this channel about how there's progressive Christians that I do occasionally interview. There are many ways in which I, of course, vehemently disagree with their perspective, but they still bring some great insights. And I think we're gonna touch on some of those today with your journey. But I just appreciate the fact that you're willing to come on a channel like mine and kind of share what your journey's been like. And I'm sure we'll have some places where we don't agree. But the nice thing too is we can do it with friendliness and kindness as opposed to animosity that was so typical for our religious background. So with that in mind, please tell us where you're coming from. What was your journey with the Christianity like, and how did it begin?
I was, raised Christian all my life. Growing up, we would go to church every Sunday. But as I got older, things got more intense. When I was 8 years old, my family moved to Italy, which is again where my father is from. And my parents actually met at a Bible school in Florence. So my mom's from this area, Houston, Texas, and they met there. That's how they got together. And my dad had always had this desire to go back to his hometown to share what he learned at the Bible college. He felt like he owed it to them, kind of a thing. So when I was 8, we moved there. And I didn't know the language. I mean, we had visited many times as I was growing up, but I was surrounded by family, but also just people in the town. And my dad began to be the preacher of the Church of Christ in that area. And Christianity is very much the minority compared to Catholicism. And there's a big distinction, in religion, when it comes to which one you are, at least according to, most of the people on the strictly Christian side, in my experience. But so while we were there, my dad's main job, he did other things, was preaching at the church. And we were trying to bring more people to the church. While we were there were American missionaries that came to our church, like mostly high schoolers, like every summer, to do their mission trip there and kind of try to attract more people to the church, which worked because Italians are very excited to see Americans. So with all of his research that he was doing during that time, he became more fundamentalist, from the place of just really wanting to honor God, do what God wanted of him. And, there were good intentions there, but it also gave him a lot more time. And he did get into some kind of interesting ideas during that time. And that was kind of the beginning of it. So when I was 9, my dad, I'm blanking on the specific verse, but there is a verse in the New Testament about Jesus telling a man that he and his whole household would need to be baptized if he was going to follow Jesus. And so my dad was like, Jesus said this to him, and I'm the pastor, my whole household needs to be baptized. So I don't want to be baptized yet because I was looking for more of like a personal feeling with religion. I mean, even at that age, I was like, I feel like I need something more before I take this step. But it was, said that was what we needed to do. And my brother had already been baptized. I'm the middle of 3. So I have an older brother and younger sister. So my younger sister and I were baptized. And it was this big celebration. It was a really, great, beautiful day as far as like how much positivity they brought into it. But it didn't sit well with me because I didn't choose it. I didn't want it. It was something I just kind of had to do.
This was in Italy?
Yeah, this is all while we were still in Italy. So after several years, we moved back to Texas. And by this time I was 11, and we were being homeschooled because we were moving back in the middle of the school year. And being 11, it was time to start middle school. And my mom didn't want me and my siblings to go to, well, I guess it was just me and my brother at that time, to be in middle school in Italy because she didn't like the system there and she didn't want us to be in that environment. Funnily enough, while we were in Italy, we went to a private Catholic school. So we were taught by nuns. They would slam the books on the table or slap people's wrists with a ruler and all of that.
Wow.
And we engaged in a lot of the Catholic processes, traditions, go to the big church down the road.
And that was somewhat better than the public school to them?
Yeah, that was better than the public school. And yet, again, there was this big, well, that's not what we are, but they were okay with us being there. They weren't like too fearful of all of that, but they just made sure we knew like we're different. Like you can go along, but that's not, we don't worship Mary. We don't believe in saints, all of that kind of stuff. So we moved back and I'm being homeschooled. We go to the same church that we left originally, that we had been going to before moving. And during this time, I was very, very lonely. Like I came back to this church and it wasn't like, oh, nice to meet you and like making new friends. But it also wasn't, oh, it's so good to see you, because I wasn't super close to the main churchgoers that were already there that around my age. So it was just kind of awkward, like, oh, hey, and so I was just kind of like this outsider. And I got depressed, which was new for me. I was even like a little bit suicidal, just ideation, just like, maybe it would be nice to just not be here, different thoughts like that. And I got more and more curious about if God is even real, if any of this is even real. So I began to pray, asking for like a sign, asking for some kind of, support or guidance to be able to believe, because I didn't feel like I was able to. And I don't remember how long it was, but it was still while I was 11. there was this night where I had a nightmare. And this was a nightmare that kind of tied to actually some like fear that I experienced while I lived in Italy. It's funny now, but one of the times when we came back to visit America, I think when I was like 10, we watched the movie The Sixth Sense, and it freaked me out. And so my imagination went wild, and I started always imagining that there were like dead people around me that like I couldn't see. And there was even this one experience where me and my cousin were playing in the bathtub in our swimsuits, and my brother came into the room and turned off the light, and it was dark. And my mind ran wild with that, you know, thinking of like dead people. And I think that's what really triggered it. So I had like a year of always fearing, having this like uneasy feeling because my imagination would run wild. But once I came back to America, I was in a new environment and I was freed of that. But then suddenly I had this nightmare where that fear came back. And I was always, you know, a good girl, people pleaser, didn't want to bother my parents. But for whatever reason, I felt motivated enough, even though I was 11, which to me was like too old for this, to go to my mom and ask to stay with her and my dad in bed for the rest of the night. So I did that. And my dad got up early in the morning, and my mom and I were in bed. And it was early, early morning. And I just remember feeling like maybe this is my chance to ask her my questions. And I don't remember what my exact questions were or what her answers were, but I just remember feeling so much comfort from her answers to feel like, oh, I can believe in God. And, you know, Christianity does make sense to my 11-year-old brain. And the fact that, you know, the way it all happened somehow also made my brain feel like God had a hand in it. Like God was giving me this opportunity to ask these questions, to find comfort and find faith.
Would you have said that at any point before that, had you at least verbally given your profession, or was this like the first time you were really going through that process?
Before that, I had through my baptism when I was in Italy. But again, like that was pushed on me. I hadn't really felt it for myself. I mean, I believed in God and all of that, but it wasn't like a personal thing. It was more like, this is what we believe. And I believed it was true, but there was no like connection there. But then, you know, the doubt set in, and that was my opportunity to ask her a question. So it felt like in my brain, I was like, wow, God answered my prayer. God gave me like this opportunity. And then I became crazy about God and Jesus and all of that. So I became, you know, this avid Bible reader. I would read my Bible every night. You know, people would always comment that, you know, this tween is always reading their Bible. I'd always get comments from adults of like, oh, wow, I wish I would do that like you, and things like that. So I felt pretty good about myself. But ultimately, I was just very curious. I was very curious and very passionate to learn more about God. And I started from the very beginning. You know, I wanted to know it all. So I started from, you know, the very beginning, and I would read it every night. And I had my little like Bible carrier that I would take everywhere, and I had like a notebook in there. I would take notes at church, you know, with what the preacher would talk about, and in youth group, because we would go to Wednesday service and Sunday service. So during these years, you know, I would also attend mission trips. There was one mission trip where we went to this place called Camp of the Hills, which was a Christian camp for like disadvantaged youth. And we were there to serve, to cook and clean and all of this. And something that this camp would do every year as like the grand finale of the week was that they would act out the crucifixion of Jesus and the whole process with that. So again, you know, at this point, I think by then I was 14. My faith was my own. I genuinely loved God, you know, wanted to be a missionary, always wanted to do something like significant with my life. And I felt that this was the way to do that. So as I'm watching this enactment of the crucifixion of Jesus, They were pretty intense and pretty extreme with it. Like they literally, like they had the Jesus volunteer and they legit beat the guy up. Like later he came up to us and showed us all his bruises and all of this. So it was pretty intense. And
Wow.
everyone's just watching, I don't know, a show or something. And I'm over here bawling because I'm thinking about, the Jesus that I was so in love with, actually going through this and worse, in real life. And so those are a couple examples of just like how important it was to me. I definitely had a servant's heart. I remember within the same camp, there was like a request for volunteers for some girls who got lice in their hair. And so many of the girls were like, ew, no, I can't do that. No, no. But I was like, heck yeah, like I'll do it. Like I loved putting myself out there. I loved doing kind of the more extreme things because it made perfect sense to me. It was easy for me because I felt like, if God has helped people do so many more difficult things, like, yeah, I can pick lice out of this girl's hair. What's the big deal?
Right.
So I was very motivated and inspired by stories of other Christian missionaries and Christian martyrs. And, I loved the book like The Hiding Place and different things like that.
Can I ask, were your parents intending to take you all back to Italy, or were at that in that point in the story were you calling the United States your home base, pretty much?
Yeah, we had reset and in the United States as our home base again.
Okay. Just curious,
Yeah.
when you were getting those questions answered by your mom and getting on fire for the Lord, what would you have like if you were to have at that point been asked by somebody, how do I get saved? What would you have told them?
It was definitely, to declare Jesus as Lord and welcome him into your heart and apologize for your sins, and that would make you saved.
Gotcha. So
Hmm.
would you have said that he was his death was like substitutionary, that he died in a death that you should have died?
That he died so that our sins could be forgiven.
Right. But I mean, like
Yeah.
your sin deserved death, and he died instead of you.
Yeah, or at least, separation from God, which equals hell.
Right.
And because he died, you have a chance to be with God because he's taking on, he's kind of balancing the scales with that. That was my belief. And, my experience with Christianity was interesting because I never feared hell. I never saw God as some kind of evil, angry God. I always, for whatever reason, saw God as loving and good. It's just I went through that season of doubting if he was even real. But then once I was, on fire for God and it was my own passion, my struggle was, well, God can't help, which is so funny if God is all powerful, but God can't help but uh, not be with his children who don't accept him because of their sin. And so I wanted to, and be a missionary for that reason, to help more people come to God for God, but also because a big part of all of this was that I believed that this was the way to have the happiest life, like to have the best experience here on earth, which is interesting because I knew that there was also, like they say, there's like so much suffering that comes for Christians. And I was aware of, like, for those who, choose to be a missionary, for example, in countries that aren't accepting, some become martyrs. And I wasn't like thinking about that per se, but I was thinking about how, there was pain and challenge in living for God, but I still felt like it was the way to be happiest because there was so much fulfillment that could come from it, because there was so much like beauty and magic in seeing God work in your life if you were, standing up for him and all these different things. But when I was 13, my mom found out about this homeschool co-op in our area, that it was less of a co-op, where like the moms would teach different subjects, but more like a homeschool private school kind of a thing, because there were teachers and they taught these particular subjects every year. And, the parents would send their kids to this church where they held the classes. but it was only 2 times a week. So that's what made it still kind of like homeschooled, I guess. You do your work at home the other days and be in class for like an hour and a half, or I think it was longer, maybe 2 hours or something for the other 2 days for those classes. So this class was called The Great Conversation. It's a whole curriculum. And this curriculum teaches Bible, teaches writing skills, apologetics, the defense of the faith, history. It teaches all these things within the biblical worldview. So they're very clear about this is the biblical worldview of all of these topics. So that was my education in those areas, all through the biblical worldview. So much of this class involves, it was also a lot of reading as well. So a lot of reading of, pretty mainstream classical pieces, but again, being taught through the biblical worldview. So this class was also a big influence on me. I remember when my mom told me about it before we started, she said, there's this class and it teaches all these subjects. And I'm not so sure about it because she didn't grow up very extreme in religion. But I was excited. I was like, heck yeah, like that's what I want. That's what I need. Like that's going to help me know God more and be closer to God and all these things that I wanted. So we did the course, we did the curriculum. And yeah, sure enough, I mean, that was within all of it. There was also in our last year, it was a 4-year course, a actual debate between creationism and evolution. So they would split the class up, have half the class debate for evolution and half the class debate for creationism. And interesting, I was on the creationism side that year. We were like, it was designated to us. But interestingly enough, that was the first year that evolution won in our debate, even though all the Christians didn't believe it. They were trying to be fair, and evolution actually won. But anywho, yeah.
Did you pick up on some aspects of evolution that made you think twice about creationism, or was that just more an academic exercise at that point?
For me, during that time, it's interesting because I'll get more into it. I kind of jumped there, but being on the creationism side, it's kind of like that argument of like the one white crow. So do white crows exist? Well, no, but if we find one, well, maybe there can be. No, they're black, but if there's one, well, then something's up. And of course, within that specific topic, people have faked it and all of that. But just looking at the argument that way, me being on the creationism side of the debate, we were all designated a particular scientist or professor, and we were to embody them in their research and present that. So the one that I had talked a lot about animals and how it was not plausible or possible for certain things to be developed if it was over time. It had to already be there for them to be able to survive. So for me, I was kind of like, okay, this makes sense, and I didn't think too much about it honestly at that point. But what happened is that I was in this course. It would teach me everything about history and literature and all these different things from this perspective. And it would also teach me how to defend the faith. Then in my personal time, I became, got deeper into all this as well. So my dad, I think, showed us the Duggars shows, the 19 Kids and Counting.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I don't know if you've seen, I think it's called Smiling Happy People or whatever their documentary is.
Yeah.
But that exactly is what drew me in. They're these smiling, happy people. They get along so well. They're so happy. And they're being even more Christian, than me and my family. Maybe they've got it right. And I wanted that. And I wanted that peace and happiness and all of that in community. So I got pretty obsessed with, that family. I was watching them on YouTube all the time, finding their shows. I also got into, I think it's Kirk Cameron and forget the other guy, but they have like a ministry on preaching the gospel, even like on the streets and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I know who you
I
mean. The
can't
guy with
really
the
remember.
banana, I think.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
Banana Man. I forget his name now, but I would watch his videos all the time too. So that's how I spent my a lot of my free time. Reading other books as well, but personally, even aside from my parents and everything, like I was very into it and I would spend my time on these things because one, I wanted to find the path towards, the most happiness, but also because I loved God, I loved Jesus, and I felt like this is how I honor them. This is how I help other people. I didn't care about what happened here on earth so much. I was more focused on, the afterlife because this is like a speck in time compared to eternity. So I didn't care about traveling. I didn't care about any kind of like material modern things. I was all into the spiritual. I would even practice, so within these years, from when I was 13 to 16, my dad, maybe even started younger, he was getting deeper into his understanding of how to follow God and all of that. And things kind of shifted bit by bit. So first we became like home church people. He decided, oh, according to this in this passage, we are not meant to have church. It's wasting so much money when we could be giving that money to the poor and the widows and all of that. It's best to do it at home. So we started doing home church. Sometimes we would connect with other families that were more along those lines. But there was a little more isolation there. And then over time, he shifted to Messianic Judaism. So
Mm.
again, getting really literal with the scripture and feeling like, well, Jesus wasn't a Christian, Jesus was a Jew. Jesus never said not to do these things. So we became Messianic Jews. And there is a synagogue for that in Houston. So we did start going to not church, but synagogue at that point. Mm-hmm.
Just ask, for anyone that doesn't know what Messianic Judaism is, can you just give a brief description of the, kind of what the differences were, at least as far as you saw them and understood? Because I know that for some people, there are people that truly become like they're adopting Judaism as their worldview. Yours was still staying within Christianity. That's just a subset of Christianity, still, right?
Yeah, so it was basically, my experience with Messianic Judaism was you live according to Jewish law, the Old Testament, except you recognize Jesus as the Messiah and Jesus as Lord and all of that. So we would celebrate, all the
Like the festivals and stuff. And
all the festivals and all of that, and go to synagogue and.
were you using a Jewish calendar?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, we would use that for the festivals and everything. We would practice the Sabbath, we would follow the Sabbath. And again, my parents had their, influence. And when my dad would make these shifts, I wouldn't just go along with them. I would challenge him. I would have to be convinced before I would really go along. But eventually I would, because I would see where he was coming from. We would talk about these things a lot. So we would all practice the Sabbath. And just personally, like my own personal, decision, again, with this desire to be closer to God and all these different things, I would fast on the Sabbath. I would only listen to Christian music or read Christian books or the Bible. Like that was how I did it. And so by the time I'm 16, it was on the Sabbath. I remember this because I was doing those things. And I walk out into the living room. So, as mentioned, my dad, he's Italian. He was a pastor. He's a talker. So I go into the living room and he's talking to my mom. And I sit down because I'm just like, what are you talking about? I'm going to listen in. Like, I was like that. And I get the gist that he's telling my mom that God isn't real and that basically, it would be dumb to continue to believe. And I literally did not believe my ears. I was so shook because all of my life, and suddenly he's saying he doesn't believe in God. I was so confused, so confused. And that kind of, I didn't, I was appalled, and I challenged him a lot. We would have many debates because I was equipped, because I was in the Great Conversation, and I had all this training and how to defend the faith, and I did all this research on my own time, so we would debate all the time.
Can I
And
just clarification? So this
yeah,
wasn't him having a theoretical conversation or a conversation about theoretical topics. He was actually saying, "I am escaping Christianity" to your mom.
yes. Hmm.
So while you, so it almost sounds like you're just trying to picture what's going on behind the scenes. He is getting, on the one hand, more and more intense about his faith and about studying the Bible and trying to be more um, in tune with what God really wants Christians to think and to how they should live today. And at the
Hmm.
same time, he's also deconstructing, little did you know. And then eventually that took precedence and everything, and his Christianity fell apart. So was he declaring pretty much he was an agnostic or an atheist at that point? Like, what was the conclusion of that as far as you know?
So at that time, it was atheism. He was saying, there is no God, and you are stupid if you continue to believe and get trapped by religion and manipulated by religion, all these different things. And it's interesting, what you just said, because I never really thought about it potentially being this long-winded deconstruction. I'm not entirely sure about that. It sounds likely, but my dad, he's he's unique, and I'm not sure if that was part of it or not. But it's worth asking. I might talk to him about that sometime.
But
But
you
yeah, I knew
maybe
nothing about it.
I have 100 questions about this. I'll keep it to like two or three. But did your mom know that he was deconstructing?
Not from what I was aware. To me, this was like boom in your face, brand new, and with like total certainty. My dad's like that, even with all the shifts. And it wasn't just religion. Like, he would get into different diets, like, this is the way we need to eat to be healthy, and different things like that. So it's kind of characteristic of his. That, which is why I say I'm not so certain it was gradual, but you know, it's not like it came easily either, because this was his whole history as well. But yeah, from my understanding, it was brand new, first conversation, and it was not the last by any means. So it became like the new thing that he would talk to us about this, challenge us in these ways.
It's like a few
And it
weeks
kind
earlier, you would have been like seeing him praying and singing, just doing Christian stuff.
of,
And then
mm-hmm,
a few weeks later, he's declaring, I'm not in this anymore. What,
mm-hmm.
I mean, I have to ask, how did that land with their marriage? Did it survive? And
No, it did not.
Hmm.
They stayed together for 3 more years, but there were challenges throughout all of that. And my mom is Christian, but she's not fundamentalist or anything like that. She's very accepting and understanding. But over time, like, things kind of calmed down. Um, but yeah, there were other reasons as well that they separated. But it became a big challenge because, again, his approach was, this is wrong and you're dumb, which I understand a lot of people can fall into that way of acting after going through that shift of like believing it and then realizing it's not true. And then, I don't know, maybe taking out some of that anger on those who still believe. But it did become a large source of tension in the household. But again, I wasn't, I was shocked by it. Like, again, I literally questioned my ears, my hearing. I was like, how could this be possible? But over time, I felt like, well, that's not what I believe. He can believe that, but I don't believe that. And I would talk to him about it. I would challenge him a lot on it because, I have some of those genes of liking to argue as an Italian. It's it's not always good. But over time, over months, it did start to get to me. The things he would say, and the approaches he would, share with me, the things he would present to me. And when it comes to that time, I don't remember specifically what the like aha moments were to reject Christianity or leave behind Christianity. But there were many things that just over time kind of built up. So for starters, after this happened, I was like, well, you're crazy and you have problems, and I'm going to challenge you and, help you see things straight. But the doubt did start to set in. And I remember going through a period of a lot of anger towards God, because I felt like, why are you making this so hard or letting this be so hard? Like, can't you help me out here? I'm trying to believe, I'm trying to, help my dad or bring more peace into the family and all these different things I was trying to do.
Yeah.
So there was anger and there was confusion. So that was my experience being 16, also 17. I think at one point, yeah, so this kind of lasted when I was 16 to 17 to 18. So like 2 years, I was going through all of this.
Well, when you're talking with your dad, can I ask, what were some of those conversations? Like, what was he telling you that was obviously a point of contention at that point, but what was he saying that you were trying to give him good answers for? And did you get any sense in your own heart that you were afraid that, wow, he really is now an apostate. He really has left. He isn't just like going through a rough patch. This isn't like a lull in his faith. He's actually rejected it. Did you feel like in the midst of these arguments and discussions you were having that you might, like, if you didn't bring him back, he's literally going to go to hell for this?
That's a good question. I don't remember fearing that, because I think I also just wasn't thinking like that death was anytime soon for him. And so I wasn't worrying about that. I was more focusing on like, this is creating, this tension in the home. I don't like that. My dad is believing in a way that I don't think is correct. And so I'm going to challenge him on that. As far as the particular conversations, all I remember is honestly him talking a lot about aliens, and like the evidence for that and people's experiences. And I know he talked about other things regarding just God in general and religion in general. Oh, you know what? And this was actually a big part of us moving to Messianic Judaism. It was all of the history of Christianity's roots and more like pagan religions. And so I think he just went further with that. Like, okay, so it's not only that Christianity is rooted in paganism, which is bad and not godly and all these things we were taught, but getting deeper into it, Judaism too was not truly God's path and all these different things. And so I think he just brought more of those conversations into it. And then, more modernly, discussions about aliens, which I don't remember how or why that would have shaken me. There were just so many conversations that I don't remember. And I think I also suppressed a lot because it was so difficult for me.
Okay.
All I remember is that I was angry and confused for 2 years. I was wrestling a lot with it. I was going back and forth. I wanted to be Christian. Like, I wanted to be Christian because I felt like this is how I'm going to have a happy life. This is my entire source of community. All my family's Christian. Everyone I knew was Christian from church or homeschool activities. And by the time I was choosing a college, I was only looking at Christian colleges because that's what you did in my community. So I wanted to stay Christian. I fought really hard for it. Like, I did research. I remember even going on my first solo trip when I was 18. I flew by myself and I paid for it by myself to go to this set apart girl conference from this ministry that was all about, being set apart, and that being, again, not only a source of good for God, but also a source of having the most fulfilling life. And I thought maybe if I was there, maybe if I was on campus for this ministry and engaging in this conference, that, God will give me what I need. But even still, it just nothing was enough. I just had this nagging feeling. I remember, because we would still visit Italy often, and I think it was actually, I don't remember, but I went to the Italian church camp around that time. And I remember talking to an American missionary and sharing with her some of my doubts. And this was after my dad, this is while my dad was atheist. And he had actually sent us a letter during that time, an email. He sent me and my sister an email. We were at this camp. And he shared with us that he was no longer atheist, that he is spiritual, but not religious, and that he is sorry for pushing us away from God and all these different things. And at that point, I was like, I don't give a crap what you have to say. You can believe in God, not believe in God. I don't care what you say anymore, because you're always moving around with what you believe, and I don't trust you. But also, again, I never jumped on any kind of belief just because he had it, but I just didn't want to even hear what he had to say anymore. But I talked to this missionary about it and shared with her my doubt. And she talked to me about the idea of like faith being a choice. Ultimately, you can't know for sure, but you can choose. And so I decided that's what I wanted. I was going to choose. So I chose that, I don't have all the answers. Yeah, I can get kind of confused about this stuff now, but this is what I want. So I'm going to choose to live this life. Well, I think it was a few months before I left for college. Actually, no, it was a few months before I graduated as a senior. Again, I was talking to my dad because, we lived in the same house. I couldn't get around it. And again, I don't remember the exact conversation, but it again came down to that. Like, although he was spiritual now, he was still very pushy about it being dumb to be religious and all these different things, how it's wrong and all of that. And I remember just getting so upset from our conversation that I went to my room and I just broke down, and I got to a point where I just had this like knowing inside of me that like I'm done. Like I can't fight for this anymore. I can't try to choose this. Like I'm fooling myself. I'm done. And that in of itself led to a whole nother breakdown, because I was taught, God is how you have peace. God is how you feel secure about how your life's going to turn out, and having help. And God is also love and joy. And, there's all these teachings that say that people without God or Jesus aren't fulfilled, are just seeking pleasure through sinful acts, and they're just empty inside and all these different things. So there was a lot of mourning of like not having that tool for support that I tried so hard to maintain for myself. But again, yeah, it was final at that point. I just let it all go. And so that coming fall, I went to my university, which I decided on while I was in that phase of like, I'm choosing Christianity, I'm choosing God, and like I was getting back into it. So yeah, now I'm going to this pretty strict Church of Christ university. It was more like a boarding school than a college because of all the rules. But that was tough too, because we had Bible every semester, chapel every day. And I felt like such an outsider. But I also felt fearful of like being found out, because I didn't want people to judge me, and I didn't know, how people would think of me or treat me and all those things. So
Yeah,
it
it's
was
huge.
pretty tough. And that was 4 years, being there. I was out of state at this university, but I did find friends who accepted me. I don't remember actually. Actually, no, I did eventually meet some people who were on like a similar path with deconstruction, and who weren't believers but were also there. So I did end up finding some sources of comfort with all of that.
So during college, you were deconstructing. Would you say you completely left Christianity at that point, or were you still in the process, or is that to come? Like, what? How far were you gone from Christianity when your college, when your undergrad was done?
By the time I started university, I was already done. Like I went into it being done.
Hmm.
The final straw was, I think it was around like March of 2014, and then I started university in August of 2014. So it was even before I graduated and all of that. So yeah, I was already deconstructed, but I was, getting to meet some people who were kind of going through the same challenges and or had been through them, and so that was good. But we were definitely the minority.
I mean, if you had deconstructed that far, what was your goal with going to a Christian college at that point? Was like a back of mind thought that maybe God can, redeem all this, and he's gonna still pull me back. It's just gonna look different, maybe like a progressive kind of Christianity thing, but I'll still be a
Mm.
Christian of some sorts. Like, were you trying to redeem your Christianity, or like what kept you from just going to a regular secular kind of college?
I did not think at that point that there was any way I would go back to Christianity. The only reason I went was because I felt like it was too late to take another route because I was already, approved and I had said I would go and all these different things. But also another big factor was that my mom said if I go here, she would pay for me. And so I was like, well, there's no question.
Yeah, that's a big factor.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So yeah, those are definitely the factors. But there was no I felt like I felt certain. I felt like I was only holding on because I wanted the benefits of it at that point. I couldn't do that anymore. I wasn't going to fool myself anymore. And so, but I still went. And so, during that time and for many years after, I was what I would call agnostic, but I was very spiritually disinterested. Not even just disinterested, but like averse to spirituality. I didn't want anyone trying to get me to think about spiritual things or push anything spiritual on me. Like I said, my dad became spiritual after this. And so I would still see him, visit him, talk to him, and he would, try to share his ideas with me. But I wanted nothing to do with them. I rejected them. And that was my experience for 10 years living as an agnostic. I was an atheist because for me, I felt like, you know, I don't know for sure that there is nothing. So I'm just going to claim agnosticism and live my life that way. I remember I actually was working with a therapist at one point on other things, and she sent me this self care wheel. So it's like the wheel with all the different pie slices of different ways you can practice self care. And there were different sections to it of different areas of life. So, like physical, mental, emotional. And I remember one of them was spiritual. And I remember getting triggered by that. Like, I don't need spirituality, which, I do believe. I do believe that we don't need spirituality. Once I looked closer at the wheel, I saw some of what they meant, which was, not just things like religion or prayer or things like that, but even things like meditation, which we now know is so beneficial to the brain and our well-being, spending time in nature, which same thing, we have so much evidence for that. And so that kind of softened me up a little bit, but spirituality was not something I was looking for. I wasn't looking for it after that time. I was just looking for, okay, what else can I do to have the best life I can while I'm here? I wasn't worried about death. I wasn't worried about what happened after death. That never concerned me. I was like, well, I'm going to be dead, so I don't care. And I didn't want to try to find out what may be true spiritually, even though I felt like there might be something, because I felt like, how could I know? And I don't want to be wrong again and go through that pain or that just drama. And so I just didn't
Yeah.
feel any interest in exploring any of it.
When you were at the point where you were escaping Christianity and saying, I'm definitely not here anymore. I'm not a Christian, and my worldview is very much not aligned with that. Once you got to that level, what was it like in terms of reflecting back on what you had believed and the surety you had? the confidence, et cetera. Just, we just knew that we knew that we knew that you had the right truth, and everyone else didn't. When you leave that, for some people, there is a sense of depression and loss, even if you're happy that, in one sense, like, yeah, no, I'm confident that this is the right choice, but it still hurts. Like, what were some of the harder parts of leaving that behind for you? And was there any particular parts that really stood out where you're just like, that really hurts? Like, I cannot believe that I got sold that part of this doctrine or worldview, and now I don't think it's true. But
Mm.
that gave me such a great structure and such a great foundation. And if that's probably not true and relevant in any way, then man, that's a huge loss to me in terms of psychology. Even if it's ultimately a win in the sense that you're now living closer to reality. Like, what were the hard parts about it? And if you could, what was the whole mental health journey like for you at that point, in the sense of, like, did you feel depressed? Did you feel overjoyed? Like, some people say it's sad, some people say it's super happy. What was it like for you?
Mhm.
And what were the things, if there were seasons of sadness, what was it like to get you out of those into seasons of happiness, saying, yes, I'm definitely done with this, but I'm quite thriving. I'm happy with where I'm landing.
Yeah, so around the time that I was in that phase of doubting, going back and forth, we had a layover in Istanbul, Turkey, where for the first time I was in a country where the majority of people were of a non-Christian or Catholic religion. So people are mostly Muslim there. And it was very impactful for me being there with this shifting worldview of maybe this isn't true, and being more detached from that, no, this is true no matter what, those blinders on and all of that. And seeing like so many people around me. I mean, it's a huge city, a very busy city. We ended up staying there a couple of days to experience it as part of our layover, and recognizing that according to this doctrine, all these people are going to hell. Like, they're going to hell and they're going to live there for eternity, suffering and being tortured. And that did not sit well with me. That seemed like very intense and very extreme. So, once I did finally fully let go of Christianity, it felt so good to be able to not worry about that, to be able to not believe in that, even if I wasn't actually worrying about it per se. I mean, I do remember times of like worrying that like a family member would go to hell because I didn't see how they had really given their heart to God or Jesus based on how they lived their lives. I remember, having those concerns at times, but mostly I was focused on, how I lived God and how I could serve God. I wasn't thinking too much about all of that, but that led me to really face it, being around so many people and also visiting their temples and seeing how these people are just as convinced and fervent in their worship as I am in mine and in my past. So that was very freeing for me, being able to not worry about that, not believe in that. I also remember that over time, I began to be more understanding of the LGBTQ community. While I was in religion, I was conditioned to see it as very unnatural, very negative, all these different things. And being able to accept these people, another thing is I had never met anyone who was like openly gay, but over time I did. And I was able to see this isn't some like depraved, sad, tortured soul that's turning to this because they're not choosing God or any of these things. This is just a person. And I remember in one of my visits home during my first year of college, which was again, soon after I closed the door on spirituality, closed that chapter, I remember telling my dad that the only good thing about not being Christian was that I could accept LGBTQ people and not fear hell. Because he was trying to get me to be spiritual. I had no interest in it. And something he did often throughout the years was use scriptures from the Bible to support his points, even though he's not religious either, just to kind of show that these messages are also included in Christianity when it comes to the spiritual topics he did hold on to. And I was always very frustrated by that. Like, I don't care about this anymore. Like, why are you sharing this with me? But that was part of the pain point for me. I still felt for quite a while that I am in some ways missing out, but at least I have this. I can accept and love people more, even people in this community, and I don't have to worry that people I care about are going to hell. So those were the positives for me for a long time. But again, it was so ingrained in me that I still lived like a Christian in many ways. You know, I met a friend my first year of college who she was in school to be a minister. She wanted to be a youth minister because that's what you can do in Church of Christ as a woman. So she was very into, the faith as well. And I actually confided in her one day, which was very hard for me. I think she was the first person I confided in, saying that actually I'm not Christian. And I remember her telling me, "You're more Christian than most people I know." And we're at this Christian school. So I still definitely lived according to those values in many ways, because I thought that's what, made life best. Now, over time, I developed my own values. I got more comfortable with things that weren't didn't make me I learned didn't make me uncomfortable because they were bad, but made me uncomfortable because I was programmed to see them as bad. So there was that. But for me, as far as like being happy about it or depressed about it, there was that huge expression of grief when I first recognized I can't do this anymore, and I just let the door close. I didn't even close it. I let it close. It's been trying to close for a while. And when I did that, there was a lot of, now as a therapist and everything, I have a lot of understanding around the importance of emotions and processing them and all of that. There was a lot of processing that grief just in that moment. And that lasted for a while. But after that, I think I had pretty quickly turned to acceptance. And I just really lived in acceptance that this isn't what I believe. When I thought back on what I used to believe, I was pretty understanding as to why I did, because there was so much education around it, and it was so much part of my everyday culture and all those different things.
I guess one part of it I would be curious about is, how did you deal with the loss of that sense that God was real and that he was present, that he was like, just because when you're a Christian and you really believe it, it's not just like something you believe. You sense his presence there. You just know. It's like it becomes more real to you than reality. Your mind makes it real, and you think he's there. You think he's talking to you, and especially in light of eternity, where you're just like, not only do I know that he's here, and he's obviously all the traits we think of him. He's loving me. He's caring for me. He's got a plan for me. That he's my heavenly Father. He's protecting me, but also that there's a long-term picture that he's going to take me to heaven someday. And when you think, for time and eternity, this whole structure that I had is like, this is the best gift ever I could, the best news, truly the gospel. This is the good news that you were lost and now you're saved and now you're found. And not only are you like in a peaceful relationship with God in terms of the sin issue, but he's actively there with you. He's talking to you. He's caring. He's watching, guiding your steps. Just that beautiful sense of the safety, the fatherhood of God, the warmth, and then the connection, the closeness, the idea that this is a love relationship with your Creator, and not just for now, but that it's forever and ever and ever. And to think none of that's ever been real. It's almost like, are you kidding me? None of that's real. Like, I don't have it. What I thought I had all this time here, I didn't have. What I thought I was going to get forever in the future, none of that's real either. Did that hurt, or did you feel like, you were okay with that? Were you coming to a place of being at peace with that? Like, what was the worst part of it for you?
No, that was definitely the root of that grief, is losing that sense of love and security that I felt I could live with the belief in God, feeling loved no matter what was happening, feeling like, well, no matter what happens, ultimately I'm going to go to heaven, or ultimately God is going to help things work out in the way it's meant to work out. So there was a lot of grief with that. And I think the way it kind of manifested in my life in following years wasn't through depression, but more towards just like a wall being put up of feeling like I I don't want anything to do with anything that's going to try to get me to think like that again. I remember hearing about some new age spirituality ideas and people talking about like asking the universe for the things that I would used to ask God about. And not only did I think it was dumb, but I got angry about it. I would feel angry by those kinds of expressions because I think that was part of the grief. You know, I lost that like personal relationship with this being that understood me and saw me and loved me. And I didn't want to move that over to this like very broad general spiritual view. And I see now that that was like a reflection of my grief. I would protect myself from the grief through anger. So there was, again, a lot of that anger towards spirituality, a lot of the resistance, even when it comes to like the, I forget how it's termed, but kind of like the like, you know, have you heard that no nonsense spirituality?
Like no woo woo kind
Where,
of stuff.
yeah, no woo woo, just the science stuff, how it's helpful to have rituals and be in touch with community and nature and all of that. It was even hard for me to think about that in the terms of spirituality because that was how I coped with it. I just put up a wall, I felt anger, and that's kind of how I think I tried to protect myself from that sadness. But
Yeah.
it's not like it was always avoided. Like I said in the beginning, there was like a long period of mourning and grieving. But then in subsequent years, I just really, again, leaned into that acceptance when I was not being faced with it. When I was being faced with it, anger would protect me. And in the long run, you know, I see how that, of course, isn't healthiest, especially with my knowledge as a therapist, but that's kind of how it kind of played out for me.
It's amazing how everyone's journey is so different. It's it's interesting though the ways that we all grieve that process, and for some people they kind of grieve real slowly along the way of deconstruction, and when you finally get to deconversion, it's like I'm done. And other people it like it lingers for a while and it shows up in different ways. And for some people, like so, there's a lot of anger. For other people, they kind of deal with that again along the way. It's I definitely can relate to the idea of sort of putting up the walls. I did not put up the walls in terms of the grieving process at all. Like I really grieved the loss of Christianity heavily, especially the afterlife. That was the biggest thing for me. It still is. I still can't believe I'm not going to get it. But um like the biggest thing for me though, along the lines of what you're saying, is the walls were put up against any kind of spirituality of any kind. And I think it's sort of natural when you feel like you've been just grossly deceived. You feel like
Mm-hmm.
I was with a snake oil salesman, and it wasn't just like a one off thing. It was like people all across the board in all these churches, all these schools, all these Christian preachers, all these books. They're all snake oil salesmen. Like en masse, I've been deceived. They've been deceiving me, and I've been deceiving myself. I've been in many ways preaching it, deceiving other people, and of course, ashamed of yourself for doing that. But you get to a point where you're just like, I can't ever be that deceived again. And you just kind
Mm-hmm.
of get sick of it. And like people ask me, well, once you left Christianity, did you go explore Buddhism? Did you go explore, Islam? And I was like, I explored them enough to know kind of what they generically believe, but I felt like I didn't need to explore much to know that everything in me just shouted, this is all bullshit, all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just was like, no more, no more. I'm done with that part of life. I think
Mm-hmm.
we are highly evolved animals, and our consciousness is just a incidental, accidental construct of the way the math worked in our heads at that time when we evolved. And it's not really a thing, but it feels like it's a thing. But we are just basically highly advanced math, and we are the AI of the animal world, as it were. We were, some chemicals took off and went haywire, and we're the AI of the primate world. Um, and at that point, once you get to a certain point where you think, I've been that deceived for decades, I can't afford any more time of deception. Like if I get deceived yet again, I've wasted my life. And your spidey senses, as they say, they go up, and your bullshit meter gets real sensitive. And so it's interesting. But those are my walls. But I still grieved it for a while, and I feel like in many ways I'm still grieving. Not in some ways, like I feel great and happy that I did escape, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm grieving the fact that it was my everything. And I often wonder, like the thing that changes my perspective now is when you see your kids and you see how different their lives can be as a result of how you're helping them not be indoctrinated and giving them the autonomy to think for themselves. You think, I wonder what my life would have been like if I'd had autonomy and I wasn't afraid of hell for 40 years, you know, and I wasn't thinking
Mm,
there's angels and demons everywhere and there's not a God looking in my head and constantly judging me. It's not just like how would I see the world, but how would I as a person and my personality, how would I be different? And I would be a completely different person, I'm sure, if I had that freedom. And that, you know, that grief, you know, even though I'm glad to have escaped Christianity and I've got overwhelming peace and joy about that, I do grieve the sense of like you lost your life. And, you know, we can do what we can to try to get it back for the rest of our lives, but you're not going to get those years back. And that definitely hurts. But it's a beautiful thing for sure to say, all right, well, it is what it is. It happened. I can be sad about it, or I can turn it into something beautiful, both in terms of something like a platform like this, but also in terms of the next generation to say, what can you give the next generation to make sure that this uh, curse, as it were, in quotes, that this curse stops with my generation. It has to stop here. Does that make sense?
mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I relate to that. You know, for the longest time, I didn't speak out about not being Christian. You know, even after all those years, like I was still worried about certain people knowing or finding out. And so I would never really post anything openly about it. And personally, like I came to a place where I feel connected to a sense of spirituality again. And I don't feel like I have all the answers by any means. I don't even think they can be found. But it was really impactful for me because I had felt for so long that it was either, you know, religion or atheism, agnosticism. I know people in like the new age exist and all of that, and I don't really identify with that either. I just identify right now as non religious but spiritual. And I know that there are so many people who refuse to leave Christianity because they feel this knowing of something spiritual, which I think that was part of what made it hard for me to leave. But then in those 10 years where I was not spiritual or religious, I just kind of chalked it up to I don't know, and that's that, and I was okay with that. But with, you know, kind of becoming someone who identifies more with spirituality again and wanting to explore that, I wanted to, in this way, kind of help with that process of, I mean, the reality is there be less religion over time because I don't see a problem with spirituality. It's the doctrine that causes people to do things and treat others in certain ways and be controlling and create so much shame and fear that I see as such a huge problem. And so I felt like, well, you know, I was agnostic for 10 years. I see that point of view. I see the religious point of view. Maybe, you know, for some people, if this is part of their path that, you know, leads to a better quality of life, maybe I can help those who kind of struggle with not wanting either, not wanting to live without spirituality or with religion. But part of the hope with that is that over time, more people can leave. And we're seeing so many people leave religion. I mean, for like the first time, there were less people part of a religious structure than being part of a religious structure in the United States. And I mean, especially with how we're seeing Christians, you know, behave and the political world, it doesn't even reflect the Jesus that they talk about. I think, you know, that's just going to continue. But I'm with you. Yeah. I mean, hopefully, and I'm sure in future generations, we will see more people freed of that.
Just for the sake of like a context, could you define spirituality for us at this point, like what it means to you, and then maybe dive into like what does that look like? How would you say you're a spiritual person, and what are some of the either things you think about or the practices you do, or both that make make you a spiritual person, and sort of making sure I'm clear because I think there are a lot of us that do tend to think of spirituality in a new age context. I remember years ago when I was a kid, we went to Boulder, Colorado, which has Pearl Street, which is like a new age capital of the world or something. You know, there's witches everywhere and crystals everywhere, and you kind of think if you're spiritual that that's what we're talking about, something like the new age movement and crystals and stuff that feels very unscientific. And yet, I don't think that's at all any way what you're talking about. So could you define what spirituality is and what it looks like and how it's evolved in your life since you sort of made that shift?
So my view of spirituality is a value of connectedness. So again, I think I may have seen that you did an interview with her, but the writer of the book No Nonsense Spirituality, Brittany Harlem, or I always forget her last name, but there is like a movement of atheism that also focuses on the benefits of spirituality, being connectedness, community, rituals, nature, things like that. I I recognize that as spirituality. My version of spirituality involves a belief that everything is one, um, which some religions hold, some New Age beliefs hold. But my view of spirituality is a belief that everything is one, a belief that there is something more than the material. I'm not a materialist, and that's why I consider myself spiritual, even though I don't know and I'm not going to claim to know. I do at this point in my life believe that there is something more and that I do have some sort of support in my life. I I connect with that and feel that through meditation, through self-reflection, journaling, just being open and being willing to notice. So, of course, we know that the brain has a reticular activating system and it will find proof for what it is conditioned to believe. So, but part of my spirituality now is actually using that to my benefit in a way to try to create more of the life that I want to have. So those are some ways in which I view spirituality and practice it, also spending time in nature, practicing faith and love, because there are ultimately so many things that we don't know. And so to me now, faith is the matter of being able to be open to accept what we don't know, but pursue things that we just have that hunch for. And that's what spirituality is like in my life.
You said everything is one. Did I get that right?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean?
Yeah, so to me, that means that, sometimes I think of it as like the cells in our body and how, if my cells had consciousness, maybe they would think that they are a cell that will live and die and that will be that, but they don't realize that they're part of a bigger system. And that's how I see everything as one, that we feel separate, but ultimately, we're all connected. And that's something that actually came to me during a like psychedelic experience, which I did not feel would be something that I would think. Because I used to hear that. I don't know if maybe you have probably, but I don't know. But when I would hear that, I'd be like, yeah, okay, whatever, that's weird now. But I did come to a place of having such a strong belief and like feeling of this is true. Um, and I do also practice with psychedelics in my therapy work with ketamine. So I don't know if you've seen the docuseries How to Change Your Mind, but within
No.
that, they talk about, so it's a Harvard professor who talks about all of the research behind psychedelics now for mental health. And so that intrigued me and I watched it. But then what also really intrigued me is that he would share that many people say they have the most spiritual experience of their lives on psychedelics. And so that got me really curious because, again, I was never looking for spirituality, but I was, a little curious, but not interested in being persuaded in any way. So when I learned about that, I was like, okay, that's interesting. And so within this idea of all is one, my perspective is, well, if we're all one and, people can take this plan and connect to some kind of greater knowledge that is found within all cultures of all times, maybe not every single one, but those are the kinds of things that I relate to spiritually, is not the ancient wisdom of any particular culture or religion, but if there's something that resounds across time and across cultures and religions, and if it's something that aligns with me, because I'll talk about God now within where I'm at in spirituality, but I don't think of it as anything close to the God we grew up with. But I will sometimes say, just for the ease of it, I have my God-given mind, heart, and soul, and if it doesn't align with those or resound with those, how can I accept it as truth? Why should I have to accept it as truth? If it's truth, and also true for me, because truth has actually kind of gotten a little more blurred for me over the years, which I never expected, because I was taught to value truth, and it was my number one value, and that there was black and there was white when it came to truth. So that's kind of shifted too over time. But yeah, that's where it's at.
Do you expect to go somewhere when you die?
I, at this point, believe in reincarnation, but I also don't think it's a very like set in stone thing. So something I've kind of thought of is like, maybe spirituality is a little bit like water. Water can be gas, it can be liquid, it can be solid, and maybe there's a similar thing with the soul. Like, I do believe in a soul, and I found what's evidence to me, which is enough evidence to me of reincarnation. And so I believe that that's possible. But I also know people who I trust who have had experiences with what some might call ghosts or spirits. And so I don't think it's a very like mechanical process, but I do believe that the soul lives on. I don't believe that I'm going to be me within that. Like, let's say I am a soul that has had thousands of past lives. Well, those people aren't really here anymore. It's me now. And when I'm dead, maybe all of those lives will somehow, be present in some way, but I don't necessarily believe that. So I do believe that me as Michela will pass away and cease to exist, but I also believe that the lessons I learn in this lifetime will continue to benefit my soul in future lifetimes, and that it's all working together to try to evolve our species, our planet, and humanity further. That's just my belief.
We have come to such incredibly different paths at that point. Wow. It's interesting to hear it.
Yeah.
We were aligning for a while. We're night and day on those points. I do just want to say again, just to bring us toward a conclusion that, this is a good example of a place where, we can be different and still respect, other people's opinions. But I think there's still some agreements that we can come to say, what is the common ground? And to me, a couple of things stand out. I'm sure we could make a big list, but one of them is the biggest one to me is that Christianity is mythology, and its core doctrines are completely irrelevant to this life. And perhaps more importantly, for the long-term picture, that we can have our beliefs and we can explore our beliefs without having any need to threaten people who don't believe like us. Like, I'm sure that you're not going to give your kids any sense of, hey, this is where, mommy's spirituality is, and if you don't believe like me, you're going to be paying for it in eternity. Like, the idea that it's the autonomy is yours, and someone else can be different. And I feel like in many ways we're vastly different in terms of where we've landed, but I think it's critical to say, like, we can at least say that these things are true, that we need to help people escape the really bad ideas that have clearly toxic, clearly hurting people, the patriarchy, the misogyny, the sense of spirituality, that we're chosen and you're not, God gave us this land, and so forth. All the ideas that have ruined our world for really thousands of years, that we can shut those down and say, we're not going to pass that garbage on to the next generation. And then at that point, to me, like, the biggest thing is on my heart is just to say, where does the evidence lead? What does the evidence, and we're all going to see it differently. Like you said, the brain has different ways that it makes those connections. There's things that things that'll be spidey senses to me, or my spidey senses will go up and say, like, no, that doesn't sound right. To someone else, it's going to be different. And it's just so fascinating to me, though, how we all do take these different journeys. I feel like in some ways, I'm not quite sure what to say about where you've landed. But I will say, just maybe a quick reflection. I don't think I could ever go down that path, but I'm kind of jealous that you could. in the sense that you seem to have some kind of hope that there's something more. I don't think there's anything that happens after we die. I think that's it. We're just dust. Um, we can obviously have an impact through our kids and through other ways that will last a generation or two potentially. But apart from that, I don't have any hope, and I'm kind of jealous that you do. Again, I don't think I'm going to land where you are ever, but I wish I could. I wish I could. I really, I agree. Like I said, I really actively grieve not having a place to go when I die, and I feel like it's still the biggest thing. And you think after this, I've been out for 5 years. I escaped in 2019. You'd think, haven't you gotten past that yet? And it's like, no. Like I tell people, like if I'm of sound mind as an old man, and I'm like, I can tell my time is up. They're like, hey, you got 6 months or less to live. Like, I'm sorry, but this is it. Say your goodbyes. If I have an experience like that and I'm of sound mind, I'll be sad. I'll be sad as an old man to think this is it. And I'm jealous. I'm jealous that you've got a different perspective on that. But again, too, I think you brought into this. I don't think we dove into this part too much, but it's also about what makes you thrive and what makes you happy. Like it's at a certain point you have to say to yourself, if
Yeah.
if being an atheist materialist leaves you joyful inside, great. If it leaves you empty inside and you feel like you just want to cry, then you got to ask yourself, even if it's true, is there some other part of this that you're missing? Because you can't, if your belief system leads you either to really bad ideas, like in Christianity, or it leads you to be ultra depressed, like there's got to be some way in which you think through it differently. And one interview that's coming to mind, it was from a long time ago. Carl Sagan, the
Hmm.
astrophysicist, his daughter, Sasha Sagan, she wrote a book that it's called For Small Creatures Such as We, which is based on a quote of Carl Sagan, something like, I want to botch it, but for small creatures such as we, the vastness of the universe is bearable only through love. And it's like just yeah, sense like we're the vastness of this universe, the fact that we're so infinitesimal and our lives are such a blip on the radar, we're here and then we're gone. It's like it's almost crushing the reality and the darkness of it all, the coldness of this universe. That most of this universe is designed, as it were, if you could, I can use that word, it's designed to crush life. It's designed to kill it. Most of the universe would crush any life anywhere. And you think, I feel so small. I feel so trapped in this one little blip of a radar life that I've got, and then I'm gone. And it's like if you go down that route, I think her point was saying, if you go down that route, it feels like it's just too dead. It's too empty. And she talks about the rituals, like you talked about, and the fact that at this point, if you want to feel like your life is meaningful, you have to find connection to your past generations, future generations, to the people around you, to your community, to yourself. You have to find those connections and build it, because otherwise the nihilism will suck the life out of you, and that's definitely a struggle I face. So I don't know if some of that makes sense, but that's just a little reaction to where you're at. And again, I do respect that you've come to a different place in it, and I hope other people still see that even though you're not my traditional interviewee, that there's some good things that you're bringing to the table. And on that note, for the people that are landing more on my side of it, where they would say, I think she's still into woo woo. What would you say to kind of to say, hey, there, well, you would, I'm sure, respect them too, just to say that there is more to this and that.
Yeah, I definitely respect anyone's journey, anyone's different journey. Again, based on everything I shared, if I'm being totally honest, I do have a hope that more people will turn away from the religion aspect. But I was agnostic for 10 years. I couldn't claim atheism personally, partly also because one of the views that I had since being with it, actually, really, since I started questioning religion, is that what we see as spirituality, I think, is science we don't understand yet. I mean, a lot of what we do right now would be seen as magic and your woo if you think this could be possible, hundreds of years ago. So I think there's a lot of like what we see as spiritual, which is science that we don't understand yet. Yeah, I definitely have respect for those who feel differently. And, what you shared about the daughter of Carl Sagan and what she wrote, it stuck with me because, what makes this meaningful is love. And in my opinion, love is the whole point of spirituality. It's the root of spirituality. I don't think we need spirituality for love, but to me, it actually ties together. And I personally was, lucky enough not to have ever struggled with nihilism, even when I was agnostic. And I just really lived with the belief that I don't know. So I'm not even going to say there is nothing. Like, I just don't know. And by the time I'm dead, what does it matter? Because if there's nothing, there's nothing. And if there's not, oh, cool, there might be something. So that's kind of what helped me personally get through it. And I think that benefits us a lot to be able to just say we don't know. I totally understand the difficulty in accepting after, especially the fallout from religion. I felt that I was resistant to spirituality because of that. I was gaining curiosity around spirituality, but not necessarily seeking it in a needy way when I came to where I'm at now. In addition to the How to Change Your Mind docuseries, that kind of got me kind of curious about spirituality through the lens, not the lens, but through the avenue of not a Bible, not someone preaching, but through a plant. That was interesting to me. And then also there's also this docuseries that also started to get me kind of curious, a little bit more open, which was called Surviving Death. And there's some pretty interesting stories in there. Again, it kind of brings me back to the white crow situation. Like, if there somehow is a white crow born, we can't say there's only black crows. We can say, well, this was kind of crazy, but this did happen. But that kind of opens up, that kind of cracks that door open a little bit. And that's kind of what happened to me and how I came to where I'm at. But I actually have respect for any beliefs. And I think it's valuable and beautiful, like you said, that outside of religion, we can more easily be accepting because we don't have that threat of hell to worry about. But I do know that there are people, within atheism who struggle to accept those who may be within even other forms of woo-woo. And that's okay. I mean, to me, I could be wrong. I'm not saying I know, but just based on my experience, I know that was coming from my pain and fear. Really, really fear, I think, is a big part of it. Fear that, if other people believe things that I don't think are true, they're going to influence others and bad things will happen. Well, another big root of spirituality for me, big benefit of it, is being able to release fear because I don't have to control, not only my control, and actually by me doing all I can to help myself and grow in myself and improve myself, that can kind of have like a domino effect on other things improving, which I think you can believe with or without any of the kind of woo-woo.
Yeah. Yeah, I love too how you're pointing out that there's so much about science we just don't know. And I remember in a very overly simplistic way of saying that, somebody was picturing this for me many years ago, but saying, for all we know, this whole universe is a drop in somebody's watering can. And like, we don't, it could be a lot bigger than we think. It could be a lot different than we think. We just don't know. We just don't know. It could be a simulation. We could be in a matrix. Who the hell knows? It's like we're guessing, we're throwing darts, and our science may someday have some really cool answers, probably well beyond our time frames. But science at some point may have some bigger answers for us. But more likely than not, the more answers we get, the more questions we'll have. And it's hopefully some of the technology can help us overcome that faster. But it's a crazy journey. And at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing for me too is just the idea, we haven't touched on this too much, a little bit, the idea of mental health, to say that there's a lot of our journeys that we're kind of, even as deconverting and deconstructing people, we're kind of focusing so much on the information. Like, my journey was a lot about comparative mythology. Like, where did the Jesus character come from? How did they get his story? Like, why did they have a purple robe and a crown of thorns? Okay, well, you got to really understand the sun god Helios to understand that. Well, why did they make him walk on water? Well, you got to really understand Hermes, to understand it. Well, why did they make him cry tears of blood and water? You got to understand Zeus's background for that. Like, that was where mine was primarily information. And in some ways, the information was the required bridge that I had to cross to get out of it. Because a lot of other stuff could have helped me escape, but didn't. I had to actually see they literally copied from these sources to create Jesus. He is literally just a literary character. But despite that journey, when you step back from it all, you're like, it was a lot about information, but it's no longer about information. Now it's about processing. What the hell was I in? What did they do to me? What did I do to myself? What was I in? Why did I love my captor? Why did I love the psychopathic Yahweh character? Why did abuse become the definition of love for me? based on God's nature in the Bible, and you realize like, okay, this is no longer just about information and comparative mythology. There is truly, as we all keep saying, there is religious trauma. And whether you feel like you went to a specific church that had preachments that traumatized you or not, just the fact that you were deceived and you were living, especially in a system of, if I do the right things and jump through the right hoops, my God, God in heaven will be happy, and he'll smile at me and say, okay, well, when you die, I'm going to give you rewards because well done, my good and faithful servant, kind of stuff. You're like that did something to you, even if you felt happy. And I felt very happy in Christianity. I thrived in Christianity, but you were still thriving within a system of oppression and abusiveness. And you're like, okay, either way, I need to figure out sort of like in a real more honest sense than ever before, how are you doing? Like not how are you doing today? Like how are you really doing in life? How is your spirit, as it were, if I can borrow that word? How's your spirit doing? Are you okay? Are you going to be okay? Or are you just surviving the day? Are you surviving the month and the year? Is there a path forward to thriving? And for a lot of us, I think we do tend to land on the side of if I just get more information and more facts and be scientifically accurate, like and more literate and more rational, that'll solve all these problems. Like it's not that straightforward. There's a lot more nuance to this. And for someone, if someone honestly was like, you know what, I don't know, but I need spirituality. I need even some woo-woo to feel happy in my own skin. Like whatever it takes to make you feel safe, especially if there's any danger of like suicidal tendencies. But even beyond, like whatever it takes to thrive, as long as you're not forcing other people into your beliefs, take that path and be very attuned to your mental health, because this, that's a big part of this. We're all not going to get to the place that we're going to thrive unless we're aware of how dark in some ways these journeys are. And I feel like I get the inside track because I get so many like behind the scenes emails and messages from people talking about how hard this is and how much grieving is going on. And I think it just makes you think to yourself, like, yeah, this isn't about just information. There's a lot of healing here. And I love how you're doing that. Could you maybe wrap us up with a final word about that? Like what do you feel like is your all of your skills and talents and passions about this area? Like how do you feel like you've been able to help people to heal, and what would you say as a final parting word to people about that journey?
Yeah. When it comes to, healing emotionally, healing for our mental health after this experience of religion, even if it was a positive one, because I had the same experience as you. I loved being religious. I was all in it. And of course, I mean, I knew, but as I grow and experience more, I know more and more just how bad it actually can be for many people within that. But whether you had a good experience or a bad experience, good or bad within it, there is the grief that comes from leaving it, the pain and fear of going from having all the answers to not really knowing, and that shift, like you've talked about, of believing in an afterlife to not believing in one or not knowing what's going to happen. Not to mention even like the purpose element of feeling like you have purpose, to feeling like that's been lost. So in my work as a therapist and within my spiritual coaching, my focus is a lot on supporting people in facing those feelings. We're not taught to feel our feelings within religion, let alone with outside of religion in our society. The vast majority of the time we're taught, don't cry, be pleasant, keep it private, all these different things. And sure, keep it private if you need to, but those feelings need to be felt. It's no longer woo-woo to recognize that unprocessed emotions don't only negatively impact our mental health, but they can be the factor, if not a contributing factor, of physical disease, cancer, autoimmune diseases. So it's actually so important to feel our feelings, to process them and release them. And if we're not used to that, we can think that it's going to be, all encompassing and just drown us. But recognizing that we can process them, and that when we process them truly, it doesn't just keep going and going and going. Depending on how much there is and how heavy it is, it could be a period, but it's not going to go on forever. It's temporary. And so often we don't understand the difference of thinking about something and feeling it. If you think about it, you're adding fuel to the fire, and those feelings are going to continue to be there. But if you pause and focus on the physical sensations of that emotion and allow those to be there, and not try to distract from them with a show or your phone or food or drinking or whatever, and just sit with that discomfort, but be with it, accept that it's there, and practice breathing as we allow it. That in itself is very, very healing. I also encourage open-mindedness because, yeah, we don't know about any kind of spiritual truth or reality, but if telling yourself there's nothing is creating this distress, that's something that you can hold a little bit more loosely as well. It's something that I encourage. I'm not about telling anybody to believe in anything or what to believe, but those kind of mental shifts and that physical shift of feeling to heal, those are what are really foundational to be able to heal from this transition and this leaving of religion and this religious trauma.
Well said. Very well said. I love it. It's good stuff. If just to mention here again as we started, if someone does want to reach out to you and potentially either follow you, of course, they could just follow you through the links I'll have. But are you taking clients? Should people reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach out to me. I am taking clients for coaching. If you're in Texas, I can work with you as a therapist, but otherwise, it's a different approach with the coaching, specifically with the spirituality. If that's what you're interested in, I am taking new clients, and you can just DM me or email me. All my info's out there.
Awesome. We'll have all the links beneath this video for people that do want to connect with you. And I just want to say thank you so much. I know it's sort of always interesting. You never know when you're invited to do an interview, like what you're going to get. If you're going to get challenged, I hope I didn't challenge you too much and make you feel uncomfortable. But I appreciate you letting me kind of play devil's advocate a little bit there. But
I do appreciate that, and you were great. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely want to keep an open mind. For sure, and I think that you've definitely reminded us of that. That there's more to this than perhaps just saying, I've come this far. There might be more to each of our journeys, and for many of us, I think it's admitting too that it took you whatever 10, 20, 40 years to change this big thing. Who's to say you won't change again? And I don't think I'm going to change myself in some major way, like the ways that you've landed. But again, you never know, and just to say, what, life is fluid, and life is beautiful, and pursue the beauty. And be open-minded a little bit to not to ideas that are just fluff or anything, but just where does the evidence lead? Where does it take you? And where does healthiness take you? And I think for so many of us, it's a good reminder that we need to go back to a lot, that we were fundamentalist Christians, like we knew, and everyone else was wrong. We don't want to become fundamentalist atheists. Like that's not the goal. We're not trying to say now we know the truth and everyone else is wrong again. We're trying to have much more nuance to our perspective. So anyway, I think you've done a good job reminding us of that today.
Thank you for having me. And actually the first podcast I was on, the woman told me, because she had her own deconstruction experience, and she said, I want to see you on Harmonic Atheist. And I thought, oh no, he wouldn't have me on, and here I am. Here
you are. Who'd have thought? It's a God thing. Praise the Lord. Well, I'll just wrap up by saying we were speaking with Michela Giordano Castro. Michela, thank you so much. I got your name right. I pronounced it right. I did it.
Yes.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. We really appreciate it. And we'll do it again sometime. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, Tim. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye-bye.